In this video, I'm going to install the AEM wideband on my WK2 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT. I'm going to start by disconnecting the negative terminal on the battery. The battery in these Jeeps is located underneath the passenger seat under an access panel. In order to protect the wideband gauge, we're going to need to install an inline fuse. I bought a pack of these inline fuses on Amazon. I'll link them in the description. You're going to have to cut the wire, strip each end, and then make sure that there's a 5 amp fuse inside of it. I then wired a connector on one end of the fuse. This is going to connect to a shutoff switch that I'm going to wire in. The shutoff switch is optional, but a buddy of mine, Don, aka Dr. Durango on YouTube, mentioned that I should wire in a shutoff switch to shut power off to the wideband when the vehicle is not running. Having the wideband on when the vehicle is not running and it's just in accessory mode is not good for your wideband sensor. So the shutoff switch that I'm wiring in will give me the ability to shut power off to the AEM wideband when the vehicle is not running. Here's that piece. I'm using a red for hot, black for neutral, 16 gauge wire. I also have heat shrink, and I'll link all this stuff in the description. Inside the Jeep, I ran the wire that came with the AEM wideband up the side behind the weather stripping and side panel and have it popped up right there to the left side of the instrument cluster. That's where I'll mount the gauge. Next, I started work on the inside. This here that we're looking at is part of the harness that comes with the AEM wideband. I'm going to strip the insulation back on the wire a little bit and then get to work on this wiring. I apologize for this next part because apparently I did not film wiring the switch in, but it's pretty basic setup. I also did not film wiring in the power for the gauge. I ran the wire along the inside portion of the firewall behind the center console into the passenger side. The passenger's kick panel closest to the door has a bunch of wiring. What I did was I used my multimeter and I found a hot wire that turns off when the ignition is off but turns on when the ignition turns on. I then tapped into this, and that's where I wired power for the AEM wideband gauge. You want to wire it to something that's going to lose power once the ignition is off because you don't want the gauge staying on and eating up your battery. You also don't want the gauge staying on when the vehicle is turned off because, like I said before, that's not good for your gauge and your wideband. In terms of wiring in the switch, it's pretty easy. You just wire it in line on the hot wire, which is the red wire. I put mine in the driver's side panel closest to the seat in center console. I drilled a hole into the panel and put the switch in there. It mounted perfect. It looks great and it's easy to reach. I then reconnected the battery and crossed my fingers. As you can see, when I turn the ignition on and then turn the shutoff switch on, the gauge comes on, which works perfectly and just how I'd wanted it to work. And when I turn the ignition off, the gauge goes off. Now all we have left to do is install the sensor into the new Stainless Works long tube headers. Once I get the SRT back from the shop from its complete engine rebuild, we'll have a working AFR gauge so we can data log air-fuel ratio with our new wideband. So make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.